Hello, hello, everyone. Happy Friday. It's a good Friday indeed. My name is Eric DeLima-Rube. I'm the head of customer success here at BuzzSumo. I'm so thrilled to be bringing you this session today, all about how to turn your customers into volunteer marketers. It's a great topic. I've been really looking forward to this for a while. I am just going to give a moment or so just for some more people to trickle in here, start to join us. The session is being recorded today, and we will be getting the recording out to everybody early next week. So don't worry if you've got to drop off before the end of the call. We will get this out to you if you've registered. I'm so excited to introduce Jay here. Probably most of you already know who Jay is. If you're like me, you've probably been reading his stuff for a long time now. And I'm really excited to hear what he has to say today. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it right to him. So for those of you that don't, Jay Baer helps businesses clone their customers. Jay has created 5 multi-million-dollar companies. He's a 7th generation entrepreneur. He's the president of Convince and Convert, which is a consulting firm that helps the world's most iconic brands like the United Nations, Nike, 3M, and Oracle, use technology to win new customers and keep the customers they've already earned. Jay's a New York Times bestselling author of 5 books. I think I have all 5 on my shelf. Jay is the host of the award-winning Social Pros podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to that podcast, do it. It's a lot of interesting and insightful information for any of us working in marketing. Jay's also a certified barbecue judge and an avid tequila collector. So Jay, maybe we'll have a separate offline conversation about some of that.
We need a separate webinar. We need a special webinar just for that.
I know, exactly right. We anything where you mention tequila and barbecue in the same sentence and my ears perk up. So everybody, I hope you're sitting down. If you're not, grab a seat. About to get some serious information sent your way. So here comes Jay. Jay, over to you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Fantastic to be here. Love the graphic on the slide here, which was created for me by my fantastic friends at BuzzSumo. I am, in fact, Jay Baer. This is, I'm not standing in water right now, but I was wearing that suit yesterday. That's how you can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Our website is convinceandconvert.com. I am deceptively youthful looking, even in that picture. It could have been the flattering light when that photo was taken, but I've been doing this a really long time, so long that when I started in digital marketing, domain names were free. You could get whatever domain name you wanted, and you could pay nothing, because who would want to have a website? What would you do with something like that? And in 1993, folks, 25 years ago, my partner and I, in my very first internet company, we sold the domain name Budweiser.com to Anheuser-Busch Brewing for 50 cases of beer. And we thought that we had gotten a very good deal because really nobody needed a website then. So to parlay that into beer seemed like a great plan. I learned at that point that maybe I should get a little bit better at business, and subsequently hopefully have done just that. Now, I don't know probably everybody on today's session. I probably know some of you for sure, but I do know this. All of us want to grow our businesses, right? That's why we're here. That's the point of this exercise. And one of the things that I've also observed to be true, and you may agree, is that advertising can work, certainly, but it can also be a difficult and somewhat expensive way to grow. We're already seeing increases in per click and per impression fees for social media advertising, the same way we saw an acceleration in costs for paid search and banner ads back in the day. That's just the natural order of things. It starts affordable, and then as competition rushes in, it gets more and more expensive, and that will continue. So this is why, because of the expense and difficulty of advertising, this is one of the reasons why we turn to content marketing. Some of you may be familiar with my book, Utility, which is all about how to use useful content to create attention. Content marketing and tools, fantastic tools like BuzzSumo, are what we use to try and get attention in an era where advertising is difficult and expensive. But I will tell you this, even more so than content and such, the best way, the very best way to grow your business, any business, is for your customers to do that growing for you, right? For your customers to do the work of customer acquisition on your behalf. What we need to do then is give our customers a story to tell. Give them a story to tell. I'll do a little quiz here about word of mouth. Now, you might be wondering how come there is an alpaca, and it is an alpaca, not a llama. Fun fact. Why is there an alpaca on the screen? It is because the cover of my new book, Talk Triggers, also has alpacas on the cover. It's been sort of a mascot now for myself and my co-author, Daniel Lemon. It's like our spirit animal. And so you'll see alpacas from time to time. And also, now that the book is out and selling very strongly, people keep sending me alpaca themed items. So I don't even know. I've got like 25 different alpaca things in my house now, which is a riot. Like every day, the UPS guy comes and it's some other sort of random alpaca thing that I didn't even know existed. But let's do a quick quiz here on word of mouth. First question. And go ahead and put your answer in the chat. I'm just interested to see what you guys think. What percent of all purchases, are primarily caused by word of mouth? What percent of all purchases are primarily caused by word of mouth? Okay. 35%, 45%, or 50%. Okay, I'm looking through the answers. All right. All right. The correct answer is 50%. Half of all purchases are primarily caused by word of mouth. Now, I suspect that some of you are in B2B, or in business to business. So let me ask you a second question. What percent of B2B purchases are primarily caused by word of mouth? 75%, 80%, or 91%? The answer is, in fact, 91%. Some of you got that correct. Well done. Sophie knocked it out of the park, as did Claire and Peter and Eric. Well, I think he might have seen the slides in advance. That seems almost unfair for Eric. But
I'm cheating. I'm cheating. Sorry, I'm cheating.
I appreciate that. That's great. So somebody asked about the source. Eric, I'll send it to you afterwards. I should have had it in the slide, but I just changed this deck a couple of days ago, so I'll send it to you. The first one's from McKinsey, and this one I can't remember. So if we kind of recap here, between 50 and 91% of all purchases are driven, at least in part, not wholly, at least in part, by word of mouth. I think that makes sense, right? I don't think anybody's going to say, nah, man, word of mouth isn't important. That's overrated. It is really important. We all know that to be true, but here's the part, okay? Here's the part that I just don't understand. And it's that despite its importance, nobody has an actual strategy for word of mouth. We got a strategy for everything these days. You got a marketing strategy, you have a digital strategy, you have a content strategy, you have a social strategy, you might have a HR and recruiting strategy, you might have a crisis management strategy. You got a strategy for everything except for word of mouth, which probably drives more purchases than all the rest of that. We just take word of mouth for granted. We just like, well, yeah, our customers will talk about us. Sure, they will. Well, why do you think that? And if so, what are they saying exactly? We are so laissez-faire about word of mouth. It is one of the great mysteries of business, something so important, and all of us are doing word of mouth on accident. What I want to help you with is give you a system for doing word of mouth on purpose. Doesn't that sound fantastic? I would just like you to go in the chat now and just give me a yes if you have ever been to the Cheesecake Factory restaurant. There are a number of cheesecake factories around the U.S. There's one in Canada now. They're expanding. There's one in Toronto, but mostly in the U.S. We have a number of people who have been to the Cheesecake Factory. We have a few that sadly have not, who are going to want to in just a moment. I can guarantee you that. Oh, Anastasia's in Europe, so no. There's a few other folks in Europe who have not been there. Okay, so it is each Cheesecake Factory restaurant is very, very large, and they have a very strange interior design, almost like, for those of you in Europe, like kind of funky French palace, sort of is kind of their interior design choices. It's a little bit weird. But the thing about Cheesecake Factory, the remarkable truth is that they spend 5 times less, 5x, not 5%, 5x, on advertising than any other large restaurant chain that they compete with in the United States. They spend almost nothing on advertising, yet they have some of the highest sales per square footage in the restaurant industry. They continue to expand. They do not advertise, fundamentally speaking. How is that possible? This is how it's possible. Here's a tweet from Terry. My daughter said her English class requires 1,000 pages of summer reading. So we went to the Cheesecake Factory and I handed her a menu. The Cheesecake Factory menu, those of you who have been there will know this. Those of you who have not will know it now. The Cheesecake Factory menu is almost unfathomably large. I'm actually holding one right now. I have one on my desk because I had my intern permanently borrow a Cheesecake Factory menu and count the words. One of the many reasons I'm looking for a new intern. And it turns out the Cheesecake Factory menu is 5,940 words long. Now, my new book on word of mouth, Talk Triggers, is 53,000 words. So the Cheesecake Factory menu is like 12, 13% as long as an entire business book. Fun fact for you. Cheesecake Factory makes chicken 85 different ways. 85 different chicken dishes on one menu. That's absurd. Nobody here could name more than 20. 85 is out of control. Now, you might think, well, that's an interesting novelty that their menu is so big, but it's much more than that. It's actually what allows them to succeed without spending a lot of money on advertising. As part of the research for this book, my co-author, Daniel Lemon, and I interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Cheesecake Factory customers, and we discovered that 38% of them have told somebody else specifically about the size of this menu in the last 30 days. It is the word of mouth propellant that turns their current customers into volunteer marketers. But man, you would not believe how big that menu is. It's crazy. Oh yeah? Interesting. I'm going to go check that out. What the giant menu is at Cheesecake Factory is a talk trigger. And a talk trigger is a strategic operational choice that compels word of mouth. Your customers simply can't help themselves. They must tell somebody else about that special little thing that you do. Now, I think it's important to recognize that a talk trigger isn't marketing, not in the classic sense that we think of. It's not a contest or a coupon or a campaign. It's not a price or a product or a promotion. It's an operational choice. To have a giant menu is an operational decision that creates huge marketing advantages, but it's not marketing in the way that we usually think of marketing. In the book, you can see the cover of the book actually does have alpacas, as I promised you. In the book, which is now available and can be procured in all the ways and places that books can be procured these days, in the book, Daniel and I talk about the 4 talk triggers requirements, because not just anything you dream up will work as a talk trigger, will create ongoing customer chatter every day, week, month, quarter, and year, which is what you want to build your business. The first thing then that your talk trigger must include, the first requirement for a talk trigger, is that it has to be remarkable. Right? In the classic definition of that word, which means worthy of remark. See, I don't know everybody here, but I know this for sure. Nobody here has ever said, hey, let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience I just had. Nobody ever says that. Why? Because that's a terrible story. And this is all about giving customers a consistent, memorable story to tell. So it has to be remarkable. Friends, same is lame. And it's one of the challenges we face in business today is that we all try to play follow the leader. We say, well, who's the category leader in our industry? Who's doing it well? And let's try and mimic their content. Let's mimic their social. Let's mimic their website. Let's mimic their product. Let's mimic their pricing. Let's mimic their customer success team. And if that's your approach, I understand why you do that. It mitigates risk. But you'll never be anything other than second best. And if all you care about is averages, you'll never be anything other than an average marketer. We have to have the courage to stand out because some of this is just physiology and science. As human beings, we are wired to discuss things that are different and ignore things that are average. So you have to have the courage to do one thing. It just has to be one thing different in the operations of your business that creates customer conversations. But we don't. We almost never do. Why? I'm not sure, but hopefully we can fix that. Because I'll tell you, the more you try to fit in, the more your customers tune out. There's a restaurant in Sacramento, California. In Northern California in the States, it's called, as you can see here in front of you, Skip's Kitchen. Skip's is a counter service restaurant. Very simple. You walk to the front of the restaurant. You order 2 hamburgers and some French fries and a chocolate shake, and they bring the food to your table when it is prepared. We've all been to a place like that. Skip's, however, is quite extraordinary in that they have spent a grand total of $0 on advertising ever in the entire history of the chain. They've been in business for 10 years. There's a line to get in almost every day. And Skip's was recently named the 29th best hamburger restaurant in America by USA Today newspaper. How is that possible? Well, it's because of their talk trigger. And it works like this. When you go to Skip's and you order, before you pay, cash, credit card, what have you, before you pay, the person working the counter pulls out a deck of playing cards from underneath the counter and fans them out face down in front of you and says, pick a card. And you select a card. And if you get a joker, your entire meal is free, whether you've ordered for just yourself or for 8 other friends. On average, about 3 people a day win this little game. And when they win, they go batshit crazy. They're taking hamburger selfies. They're calling their mom crying. They're putting reviews on TripAdvisor and Yelp. A marching band shows up. It's quite a thing. And it is so effective that in Sacramento, despite the fact, as you can plainly see, the sign at Skip's Kitchen is hard to miss. In their market, nobody really calls it Skip's Kitchen. They call it That Joker Restaurant. The second thing that your talk trigger must be is it must be repeatable. Everybody at Skip's, everybody who orders gets a chance to play. Everybody at Cheesecake Factory gets the same giant menu. Consistency is one of the keys to word of mouth strategy. And this is a little bit different, I will acknowledge, than some of the current day thought about marketing, especially about social media. Because as some of you well know, there is a philosophy in marketing today that, especially in social, we try to use surprise and delight to create conversation. Surprise and delight, if you're unfamiliar, is a circumstance where you take one customer in a particular scenario and you treat that customer much different or much better than customers are routinely treated. Hotels do this quite a bit. So some guy goes to a hotel and he checks in and he looks around the room and there's a live panda bear in his room and a eucalyptus tree for it to eat. And he's like, oh my God, this is totally crazy. And I'm going to take a photo. I'm going to put it on Twitter. And then it goes to Reddit and then the news calls and it becomes like a whole thing for a while. That can work. Or you could just end up with a bear in your room. You don't really know. Parole, thank you for the note that pandas eat bamboo. Yes, I was confusing pandas and koalas there in that last story. I will fix that for next time. Yes, there should be a bamboo tree in the room. Or if it was a live koala bear in your room, it would be a eucalyptus tree, which maybe it's that would be surprise and delight if you got one of each, right? You've got a panda in one corner and a koala in the other corner. It's like a cage match. That I would actually pay to see. So the challenge with surprise and delight is that it is not something that you can bank on, right? I mean, fundamentally, surprise and delight is a stunt. It's not a strategy, right? It's a PR stunt. It's not something that you can rely upon into the future. It's essentially a lottery ticket, right? It might work, but it might not. And I would much rather use my time and energy on a talk trigger that is repeatable and consistent, that I know will continue to be talked about by my customers, as opposed to sort of a one-shot deal. What's funny about talk triggers is that sometimes businesses that you wouldn't think have this kind of an approach actually do. And it's sort of under the surface. It's kind of sleeper. One of those is CVS Pharmacy, which for those of you in Europe is the largest chain of druggists in the United States. Very, very large company. They actually just bought one of our major healthcare organizations. This is a billion dollar organization with thousands of retail locations across the US. Now, generally speaking, their operations are fairly mundane. You go in and you get pharmaceuticals, or you get, whatever, toilet paper or magazines or candy bars or whatever. But what's amazing about CVS and their talk trigger, if anybody in the US can guess, what the CVS talk trigger is, put it in the chat right now. I just want to see if anybody knows just how sleeper this one actually is. Right there, pondering. I don't think anybody knows. They will when I show it to you. So CVS has a loyalty program, like most retailers now. And if you use your CVS card, when you check out, they give you a ridiculously long receipt. And each receipt has all these coupons for other potential products, including things you don't need and you've never heard of. So here's a tweet from Emma. I love this. Some personal news. CVS gave me a 5'8" receipt today. I think that's hilarious. Then you see this tweet from Ariana. I bought one item at CVS, and this is my receipt, which is as wide as her couch. And then this one is truly inspired on Twitter from Jay Cyrus. When you marry a CVS receipt, which is really, really good. That is the thing that creates conversations, right? Is like, why is this receipt so long? This is bizarre. And then you see your friend, you're like, hey, did you see this receipt I got from CVS? It is their operational choice that creates conversations. But the key is it's repeatable. Everybody who goes to CVS and uses the card, which is millions and millions and millions of people, gets that same kind of super long receipt. It's not just on Wednesdays. It's not just if you bought this weird particular item. It's not just at the end of the month. It's every time. The third thing that your talk trigger must be is it must be reasonable. See, one of the things that we're guilty of, I think, as marketers today is we're like, well, man, I got to tell you, competition is out there. It's hard to break through. It's hard to get attention now. So what we should do is do something really big. We got to do something really big to break through. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a contest. And all of our customers, you guys give us your name and your email address, and one of you is going to win an island. People are, wait, what? What? An island? That can't be right. We tend to try and make things so big that they break through. But when you do that, it actually has the opposite effect. When you give customers experiences that are too grand, it actually creates suspicion, not conversation. Because remember, this is all about customers telling stories to one another. I'm not going to tell my friend a story if I think the story is fake, or if I think there's a catch, or if I think there's some sort of other shoe that's going to drop. So when you overshoot the mark, the story stops because people don't believe it. If I say to you, you get a car, and you get a car, you get a car, you get a car, that's Oprah Winfrey, right? Nobody else can do that because nobody else has that kind of trust. What you want is a talk trigger that's different enough to be talkable, memorable, interesting, but not so big that it is untrusted. For example, if I just show you this photo, does anybody know, put it in the chat, does anybody know what hotel chain I'm talking about? What hotel chain? Okay, Melinda. Melinda's the first one. Melinda Thomas, Doubletree Hotels by Hilton. You're correct. Eric, make sure we get Melinda a book, please. Melinda is correct, as are many of you, Caroline as well. Doubletree Hotels by Hilton has had this talk trigger where every time somebody checks into the hotel, they get a warm chocolate chip cookie. They've been doing this every day for 30 years. 30 years. Today, as we have this conversation, friends, Doubletree will distribute 75,000 cookies. That's a lot of cookies. As part of the book, Daniel and I surveyed hundreds of Doubletree guests, and we discovered that 34% of them have actually talked about the cookie, have told somebody else specifically about this cookie in the last 30 days. So if you do the math on that, it means that there are approximately 25,500 customer conversations about this cookie every single day. A companion question: when's the last time you saw a Doubletree ad? Not very often, because the cookie is the ad and the guests are the marketing department. It is the propellant of their growth. And if you go to social and you search Doubletree plus cookie, you'll see all kinds of content about the cookies. Here's a tweet from Diane. Her username is @KentuckyDiane. She says, "These are the best cookies in the world," which they're not. I mean, they're really good cookies. They're good cookies. And on the list of cookies that I've been given for free by a hotel, probably the best, but not the best cookies in the world. That's probably putting it a little too much. But Diane says, "I try to always stay at Doubletree just to get them." Well, here's somebody who is booking hotels based on a chocolate chip cookie, not based on, I don't know, location, price. Do they have a restaurant? She's booking hotels based on a cookie. And let's remember, it's just a cookie. They're not giving away an island. It's a chocolate chip cookie. So don't fool yourself into thinking that your talk trigger has to be this giant, enormous thing. It just has to be consistent and something that your customers don't expect. Now, the very best word of mouth strategy, the best organizations at this, have a good talk trigger, and then they use strategic content marketing to amplify that talk trigger. And Doubletree is one of the best in the world at this. As I told you, they don't do a lot of advertising, but they do a fair bit of content to accentuate their talk trigger. For example, this is an ebook that they published called Start with Cookies, and it's a whole recipe book of how to use the Doubletree chocolate chip cookies in other recipes, right? So how do you make a cookie milkshake and a cookie salad? And that doesn't sound very good. That's probably not an actual recipe, but they've got a bunch of different things that they've kind of said, all right, cookies is our thing. How do we extend that? Using tools like BuzzSumo to find out exactly what sort of categories and what sort of topics would resonate with your audience would be a really good way to sort of combine your content marketing program with your talk trigger word of mouth strategy. Fourth thing that your talk trigger must be is it must be relevant. It has to make sense. See, customers don't tell stories that don't make sense because then it makes them look like they don't know what they're talking about. The Doubletree cookie, one of the reasons it works so well is that, as you may know, there are 14 different hotels in the Hilton collection of brands. You have Hilton, Hilton Garden Inn, Hampton Inn, the Conrad, et cetera, et cetera. Doubletree is just one of them. Each of those hotel chains has their own brand positioning, which is very important because they don't want to be competing against one another for the exact same customer, right? So they kind of have a sense of how the segmentation works between the brands. The DoubleTree brand positioning is the warm welcome. DoubleTree wants to own that 8 minutes or so between when you set foot inside the hotel and when you set foot inside your room. So they spend more time and money than usual on lobby design. They spend more time and money training their front desk personnel versus other hotel brands. They want to be really good at that first impression. So the cookie thing very much fits into that thesis, does it not? Because they don't just have a pile of cookies on the counter. That wouldn't really work. What happens is your front desk person turns, goes to an oven that is behind the desk, pulls out a warm chocolate chip cookie, puts it in a little bag, and then hands it to you. It's a hand-to-hand pass. That's one of the keys to it. It's hand-to-hand. It's almost like a Japanese tea ceremony, but with chocolate chip cookies. So all of that makes sense, right? Warm welcome, warm chocolate chip cookie, ta-da, right? It is relevant. This is Jay Sofer. Jay is a locksmith in New York City. He is the highest rated locksmith in New York on Yelp, but even more so, check this out. He's one of the highest rated businesses in New York on Yelp of any kind, regardless of business type, which is a pretty high bar to clear. I think you'd agree. He also, unofficially, in my estimation, has the best hair of any locksmith ever. He's like a dreamy locksmith guy. So he has a great talk trigger. When Jay finishes working on your locks, he does a free security audit of your home, checks all the windows and doors, and then he oils every lock, every window, every door, does both of those things for free. Has a big impact. This is an actual, real Yelp review of Jay Sofer. I almost want to get locked out again. Yeah, my experience was that great. That is a strong testimonial. It certainly is a strong testimonial. One of the things that Jay does really well is he uses content to accentuate his skills. This is his blog. His company is called Lockbusters. 6 things to consider when you're choosing a front door lock, right? He's a locksmith, right? He's really, really good at content marketing in addition to being an amazing locksmith, in addition to having a defined word of mouth strategy, right? It all fits together like a triangle. Back to my story about relevancy, however. So Jay does this thing, right? Now imagine if my last 2 stories were reversed. DoubleTree and Jay Sofer at Lockbusters. Imagine that Jay is at your home and Jay has just finished rekeying your front door. And Jay says, "Hey, Eric, before I go, would you like me to give you a warm chocolate chip cookie that I baked in my locksmith van?" You would be less enthusiastic about that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to answer that or not.
Please
Let's just pretend that's the real pause I would probably have at the time.
Because you're like, well, that's very kind, but like, what happens in a locksmith van? I don't think it's safe baking practices. That's not typically associated. It's just incongruous, right? It's too weird, and it's not a story that you would tell. At least you wouldn't tell it with confidence. Conversely, let's say you go to DoubleTree and you're checking in, and they say, "Eric, before you get to your room, would you like us to perform a free security audit?" You would say, "If that's necessary, I would like to check out right now, please," because I feel unsafe. So the key to having a talk trigger that creates reliable word of mouth every day is it has to be a story that makes sense in the context of who you are, what you do, and what you sell. This isn't just about random weirdness, because that means, like, if you're just trying to be random and be unexpected and shocking, go rent an elephant, right? And just walk them through your conference room or something. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about an operational choice that creates conversations in a consistent and reliable fashion. So I've told you the 4 things that your talk trigger must include. I also want to touch on the 4 types of talk triggers, for different ways that you can do this. The one that we've talked about the most is the one that you see most often in the wild, and that's talkable generosity. That's when you do something more generous than your customers expect and anticipate. Jay Sofer doing a free security audit is talkable generosity. Chocolate chip cookie, talkable generosity. But there are other styles. And even within talkable generosity, while I've told you several ideas that are consumer facing, it works just as well. And in fact, perhaps better in B2B, because as we talked about at the very beginning in our little quiz, about 90% of all B2B purchases are influenced by word of mouth. So if you can develop a talk trigger in B2B, you really got gold in your river. And it works the same, right? It's not a different playbook if you're B2B. It's the same playbook. It just has more impact because most B2B companies are super boring. Here's one that's not. It's called Windsor ONE. Windsor ONE is a manufacturer. They make high-end wooden trim. So their customers are carpenters and master craftsmen. They make crown molding and baseboards and like fancy chair rails and wainscoting, all that kind of stuff. And like a lot of manufacturers, they have a pretty big product line, lots of different types of wood, lots of different colors and stains, and then lots of different cuts depending on the job. One of their challenges is to communicate the breadth of that product line to their customers. And their customers, as I said, are carpenters and such. They're not like trolling the website and browsing the online catalog. They're out doing stuff, right? They're making wood. So what they used to do is they used to spend a bunch of money every year on print ads. And they would buy magazine ads, and in the magazine ad, they'd essentially list a bunch of products. It was almost like a magazine ad / brochure or / catalog. They put a tracking phone number and a tracking URL on that eventually and realized that they weren't getting any calls and almost no website visits. So they said, well, what if instead we worked on a word of mouth strategy? So now what happens is every single Windsor ONE board they manufacture, on the back of the board, this is a baseboard. On the back of the board is this stamp. It says prime all cuts, which is good advice if you're going to cut something. And then it says call Kurt for a shirt, 888-229-7900. Now you've got your saw ready and you're going to attack this board and you see this, you're like, huh, who is Kurt? And curiosity will get the best of you. So you dial the number, first ring pickup. Hey, this is Kurt. Oh, wow, it's a real guy. Who's this? Oh, it's Jay. Oh, where are you, Jay? Oh, I'm in Indiana. What are you working on? Oh, I'm doing a house remodel. Oh, fantastic. Hey, are you a fat guy, Jay? Excuse me, Kurt? Well, I got to figure out what size shirt to send you. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm probably XL. Hey, what kind of products are you working with? And you explain what you're using. And then Kurt tells you, oh, we also have this kind and this kind and this kind and this kind. See, Kurt is the head of inside sales for Windsor ONE. And this whole telephone conversation becomes essentially an audio catalog. He describes all the related products that you might not know about. And then Kurt says, hey, Jay, are you working by yourself? I'm like, no, I got a whole crew. Oh, yeah? How fat are they? Well, depends. Lenny's a little heavy. Takes on all the sizes. The next day, a Federal Express box overnight comes to the job site. Includes shirts with a handwritten note for every person on the crew, and then samples of every product discussed on the call. That's an incredible talk trigger. They now don't do any magazine ads. The size of the company has almost doubled. And if you're ever driving around a job site in the US and you're some sort of construction zone and you see a Got Wood t-shirt, now you'll know where it came from. Talkable generosity. Second style of talk trigger is talkable responsiveness. This is when you are faster or more quick than your customers expect. Sometimes this doesn't happen. Valentine's Day, 2.5 years ago, Amanda goes on Twitter and says, guys, I'm trapped in an Amtrak. That's the American train system for those of you not here. I'm trapped in an Amtrak elevator at BWI Airport, which is Baltimore. Help. I'm trapped in an elevator at Baltimore's airport. Help. Now, the last word of this tweet is quite clearly help, right? We can all agree on that. 205 days later, Are you still in the elevator? Let's hope not. Let's hope not. There was a software error, obviously, with your social media listening platform, and this got missed, and then they saw it again, didn't check the date, and sent that tweet, which is very, very funny now in retrospect. Amanda was fine. She was able to get out of the elevator. They felt bad about it. They sent her a free trip on the train, and she took it and loved it, and everybody had a good time ultimately, but this was, at least temporarily, not a great look for Amtrak's responsiveness. Sometimes the best way to create conversation is to just give your customers a sense that you can be reached anytime at any place. There's a bank in the U.S. They're based in Portland called Umpqua Bank, and Umpqua has 400 branches, maybe a little more. They're getting to be pretty big, and in every single bank location, they have kind of a silver old-timey phone like this. And then under the phone is this little sign. Sometimes it's on the wall. In this case, it's on the table. It says, call us. Now, if you look closely, the first number there in the top, 8, bank president. So for real, you can pick up this phone inside any Umpqua bank, press one number, 8, and it will connect you to the president of the bank. Now, not the president of that branch in your neighborhood, the president of the corporation, which has 400 locations. It is a tens of billions of dollars organization. Rings his desk. That is amazing. They get about 5 calls a week, he said. And 4 of them are people thinking, oh, sorry, I thought this was fake. And they hang it up. You get 1 call a week from somebody who's actually like, oh, wait, I having a problem, or I just want to have a chat, what have you. So this idea of being that responsive, right? You wouldn't have to send a letter or talk to 114 people. You can press one number and get to the president of the company. I love that idea as a talk trigger, and people who bank at Umpqua talk about it all the time. And again, it's almost like Skip's Kitchen. You don't have to win the Joker game for it to create a story. In the same way it works here. You don't have to actually have called the number to tell the story about the fact that the number exists. Third type of talk trigger is talkable usefulness. This is when you're more useful than your customers expect you to be. This one is all about the content. This is essentially a content marketing talk trigger. As I mentioned, my book Utility fits very nicely into this premise. One of my friends, Joe Manusa, is the king of usefulness talk triggers. Joe is a realtor in Tallahassee, Florida. He's a little bit different, though, because he only represents sellers. He doesn't, if you want to buy a house, he doesn't do that. He also only represents sellers who have homes between $200,000 and $400,000, which is not a super big house in many cases. So if you want to, if you're trying to sell a giant house, he's not your guy. But what's common is if you have a home that's between $200,000 and $400,000, chances are, your results may vary, but chances are you probably don't have a tremendous amount of upside equity in that home, which means it's very common in that segment of the market for customers to think, well, I could use a real estate agent or broker like Joe to help me sell this home, or I could sell it myself. And then if I sell it myself, I can keep the commission. 6% is what it would be here in the States. Joe knows this. Oh, all realtors know it, but he's the only one who does something about it, because here's the truth. Every professional services provider on the planet, real estate, consulting like me, accounting, law, medicine, it doesn't matter. Everybody's website says approximately the same thing. Now, you may rearrange the words a little differently, but it says the same thing, reading between the lines. It says, behold the awesome power of my expertise. I know things you could possibly never know. I've been doing this for years. Do not try this yourself. That's really what those websites say, isn't it? Joe's doesn't. Joe sat down, he wrote a 60-page free downloadable guide called How to Sell a Home on Your Own in Florida. And it's just that. It's exactly what you need to know. Every person to call, every document to sign, every form to fill out, how you sell a house on your own without a realtor. I called Joe. I interviewed him for a book. And I said, Joe, I don't get this because it seems to me like you're giving people everything necessary to not hire you. And he said, well, Jay, I understand why you would think that. However, what you also don't understand is that people get to about page 19 and they say, holy cow, is it hard to sell a house on my own? That's way more work than I wanted. What was I thinking? I was crazy. It's his number one source of new customers because his name, email address, and phone number are on every page, you see. And not only does this work for the first person who reads it, it becomes a talk trigger and creates waves of new customers for him. Because if you've got a home between $200,000 and $400,000, guess who else does? Your friends and neighbors. And when they go to think about selling their house, say, hey, Jay, weren't you going to sell that house yourself? I'm like, yeah, I was, but don't do that. It's way harder than you think. You're going to get to page 19 and realize just how difficult it is. You should just call Joe. Talkable usefulness. Fourth type of talk trigger I want to mention to you today is talkable empathy. And this is one that actually wouldn't have made the list a couple years ago because I'm old enough to remember, some of you are as well, the time when treating customers with empathy and humanity and caring and warmth and kindness was actually the default. That's just how business was done. Ain't like that anymore. I think in business and in life, certainly in politics, we are currently in an era of empathy deficit. Now, it's kind of sad as a human being, but as a business person, it's a real opportunity because now when you treat customers with disproportionate kindness, it stands out like never before and creates conversations like never before. Doesn't have to be hard either. My friend Glenn Gorab is an oral surgeon in Clinton, New Jersey. I was just out there yesterday, as a matter of fact. And Glenn operates in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state area. There are quite literally hundreds of oral surgeons, hundreds in his region. He is the highest rated oral surgeon by patients in the region. He also is the only one who has never had a legal proceeding against him. And even those things are true. He's not the best surgeon. By his own admission, he's like, I'm not the best surgeon. I'm really good, but I'm not the best. He has the best relationships with patients, though. And it's because of his talk trigger. Here's how he does it. Every Friday, his office staff gives Glenn a list of names and phone numbers. On Saturday, he calls each of those people. And he says, hi, this is Glenn. I'm your oral surgeon. I understand that you're coming to the office for the very first time next week. Before you get here, do you have any questions? And people can't believe it because like, you may have had an oral surgery procedure. You may have had a root canal or a wisdom tooth extraction or whatever. And maybe your surgeon called you afterwards and said, how's the pain? How's the bleeding? Whatever. That happens. But you've never had a doctor call you before you ever set foot in the office. It's just not done. But why isn't it? It's so empathetic. It creates bonds with the patients from the very beginning. And Glenn tells me that every single day, every day, somebody calls him and says, I have to drive 12 miles out of my way. I have to pass up all these other surgeons, but I want you to be my doctor because you're the doctor who called my friend before she ever came to the office. It's a strategic, operational choice that compels conversation. Talkable empathy. There's more types of talk triggers in the book. There's also, most importantly, a 6-step process in the book of exactly how each and every one of you can create, test, measure, implement, and amplify your own talk triggers. This is the exact same process that we use at Convince and Convert when we do this kind of work for clients. We've now have a Facebook group of readers who have read the book, who are working on their own talk triggers right now. I absolutely guarantee you that this will work. Not to mention the fact there's a talk trigger for the book about talk triggers, which probably makes sense to you. And the talk trigger is this. If you buy the book and for whatever reason you don't like it, if you go to talktriggers.com and send me a note, Daniel and I will buy you any other book that you want. And we mean it. You want a first edition Bible? We'll track one down somehow. So you have literally no risk. You buy this book, you don't like it, we'll take care of it. Doesn't matter. So you're risking nothing, giving it a shot. We're that comfortable in it. The book is selling like crazy. We've had several people say it's the best business book they've ever read, which is pretty high praise. I think you are going to like it. So if you send me a text message, triggers with an S, to 66866 if you're in the US. If you're outside the US, send an email to Eric afterwards and I'll get you the link. I will send you immediately the 6-step process document. Okay, so I prefer that you read the book, but if you don't want to read the book, I will send you the 6-step planning process for how to make a talk trigger for free. It is my gift to you. And more importantly, I hope that you actually do this, because the best way to build your business is for your customers to do it for you. So remember though, competency doesn't create conversations. The fact that you're a good business keeps customers, but it doesn't create conversations. We don't talk about good, we talk about different. Same is lame. Do one thing different. Choose to do one thing different. Give your customers a story to tell, and they will tell it over and over and over and over. And then what you do is use content to amplify it, the way that DoubleTree does, the way that JSOFR does. That's the key. That's why tools like BuzzSumo, who I use personally every day, are so incredibly important. Send me a text message if you can. Triggers to 66866. Eric, we got a little time for questions?
Yeah, I think we can get a couple of questions going.
Right on, let's do it.
Awesome. That was so fantastic. Let's see if we'll do a speed round. People, submit your questions. We got a couple here. Come in. Let me start with this. Who's asking this one? It looks like Claire is asking, do talk triggers work as well for businesses that conduct all of their transactions online?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Like one of the case studies in the book, I didn't do it here because it requires an audio clip. Uber Conference, right? Uber Conference, free conference calling service. There's tons of them, only online. They have super hilarious on-hold music, and that is their talk trigger. They're strictly an online business. Absolutely. In fact, I will tell you that sometimes it's easier to use talk triggers online because you're more in control of the customer journey. Like there's only certain points where you are sending something to the customer or they're sending something to you. So yes, it works exactly the same. A couple other questions here I'll just knock off. Yes, the book's available on audio, absolutely, and Kindle, all those different things. Software companies, yes, tons actually. There's at least 3 software company examples in the book. Uber Conference, Uber Flip, and FreshBooks. All 3 are signature case studies in that book. You'll like that, Margaret.
That's excellent. So Pat is asking, what tips do you have for connecting those stories to content? We seem to have a disconnect when it comes to actually creating the content out of the stories people tell us.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. We talk about that in step 6 of the process guide, which is amplify your talk triggers. And it's a little bit of a fine line, right? So you think about how DoubleTree does it, right? The cookie is the talk trigger, and then they accentuate that with recipe books, et cetera, that focus on the cookies. That works really, really well because you're not using the content as an ad, right? You're using the content as a reminder. We find that works the best, because if you start to lay it on a little too heavy, then you're not really relying on word of mouth at that point, right? It's you're coming at it a little too aggressively. So the best way to do it, I think, is to, once the talk trigger starts to work and you start to see customer chatter in social media or customer surveys that you might be working on, start to use some of those customer comments and start to branch out from there. So almost create a topical map where, for example, the DoubleTree situation, top of the topic map is chocolate chip cookies, right? But then there's a bunch of other things that you can do that you start to see from customers. Okay, when do they eat the cookie? Do they eat it as soon as they get it from the person at the front desk, or do they save it for later, right? What's the strategy around that? How do you keep the cookie fresh in your hotel room? What do you drink with the cookie? Is it milk? Is it soda? Is it beer? Is it wine? Is it coffee? Is it nothing? So you've got that one, right? What are the best strategies for getting an extra cookie, right? Do you just go ask for one? Do you got to make up a story, right? So that you could create a whole content series, podcast, video, blogs, infographics, all about this talk trigger. You just have to understand kind of the topics and the topic map, and obviously BuzzSumo is great for that.
Yeah, and if I could sort of piggyback on that, I mean that's definitely something we're seeing as well. Is more and more content strategists and experts kind of moving away from this keyword by keyword domination approach and really trying to own an entire category. All of the different, like you said, there's so many different ways you can brainstorm content ideas within a topic, and that seems to be a place where we're seeing a lot of really smart content marketers put their energies going forward. All right, let's see. What other question do we have here? I think we got kind of one more. We got a couple more that popped in here. Let's take a look. Okay, so Joanna, let me read this question here. How do B2B companies transfer a good word of mouth reputation online? Oh, interesting. What steps should be taken when brand has a really good opinion? People talk about it, but they don't really talk about it online very much. So I guess what Joanna's really asking here is that they've got a kind of good offline word of mouth, a good kind of maybe communication going, but not how do you transfer that online?
You may not. It might not work. Usually what happens is when people have I'm throwing up the air quotes now, a good reputation, the chatter is around competency, not around something remarkable like a talk trigger. So what you'll probably want to do is two things. Give people a story to tell that is a little bit more memorable because they didn't see it coming, right? So you think about Uber conference, right? They're very competent, right? If you want a free conference call, they will give you a free conference call. But the talk trigger is the on hold music, right? So you have to kind of figure out what that is in your B2B business, and then make sure that it is really important in B2B. Just because you may not see evidence of customer chatter online doesn't mean that customer chatter doesn't exist. So what we talk about in the book, it's really important, is to be surveying customers and ask them, not every customer, but random survey, since you purchased from us, have you told anybody about the business? If so, what did you tell them? And by the way, was it one of these things? So you ask them, did they talk about you? Yes or no? Then you ask them to mention the talk trigger, hopefully. And then you give them a list of attributes, one of which is your talk trigger. And doing that kind of research helps you understand that even if people aren't tweeting about it, because look, there's some B2B companies that people just aren't going to, there's just not how it works, right? They're not going to be like social sharing about some companies. That's okay, right? That doesn't mean word of mouth isn't happening. It just means you can't see it. And fun fact, today, 50% of all word of mouth is online and 50% is offline in terms of volume. Offline, however, is a little bit more persuasive, face-to-face, because it's just a little more personal and relevant. So both are really important.
Yeah, that's excellent. All right, speed round, really quick. We'll try to squeeze these in. How important would you say is humor in a talk trigger?
It can be really important. That's the fifth type of talk trigger I didn't mention today, which is called talkable attitude. Can be really effective. That's what Uberflip uses and some other organizations, but it has to really fit the DNA of your company. If it feels like you're trying to be funny instead of you are funny, it doesn't work.
Oh gosh, if only all comedians had that advice. Okay, yeah, I guess this last question, real quick, is they're both kind of wrapped up together, which is, how do you establish the right talk trigger? How, especially for a company that's already in business, how do you kind of pivot to, address this?
Yeah. So the way we do it, we talk about this in great detail in the book in the process section, but the first thing you want to do is map your customer journey. So you know all the touch points you have with your customer, because those touch points are where the talk trigger is deployed. Second thing you do is interview a bunch of your customers, and you say, hey, at each of these touch points, what did you expect would happen? Because once you know what people expect, Eric, you know what they don't expect. Mm-hmm. What they don't expect is where the talk trigger lives. But let me tell you what is the very worst way to do this. The very worst way to come up with a talk trigger is to sit around and brainstorm. Because if it was that easy, you'd already have one. You got to do the research and you got to talk to your customers.
Mm-hmm. That's such good advice. It's the kind of great advice to end on today. Jay, some people are asking about the slides. Is that something you're wanting to share, or should we just keep?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, we'll make it happen. Sure, no worries.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I think Ed asked that earlier. Well, everybody, thanks.
I also say, speaking of that for Ed, if you go to talktriggers.com, there are slides there. There's also infographics, research, videos, a discussion guide for group work if they want to go through the book as a book club, etc. There's like a million free things at talktriggers.com, so knock yourselves out.
So fantastic. This is so great, Jay. Thanks so much for doing this today. Really learned a lot.
My pleasure.
Thanks everybody for attending. As we mentioned at the top, the recording, we'll send that out next week. We've got a bunch of stuff here in the chat window. Remember to text triggers to 66866 to keep this conversation going with Jay. And yeah, get his book. It's awesome. It's a really, really great read. And check out talktriggers.com for more information. Thanks again, Jay. Very, very appreciative of your time today. And everybody have a great weekend.